Today's Diana Prince is Melissa Armstrong, a certified public accountant and the visionary founder of Steadyhand Accounting and Advisory. As a fractional controller and CPA since 2003, Melissa is passionate about helping businesses streamline accounting processes, create efficiency, and make accounting work for you, not the other way around. She's been a steadfast partner for business owners navigating their financial journeys. When Melissa is not crunching numbers, she immerses herself in urban fantasy novels, explores her creativity through writing, or sets off on paddleboarding and travel adventures. Melissa truly exemplifies the balance of expertise and passion, driving others towards financial clarity and success. Melissa, welcome to Diana Prince. Glad to have you on.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Me too, because a while ago we had a conversation and we each shared our backstory. But there's one little detail that I left out when we were chatting was my aversion to accounting or anything that has to do with accounting. It is just so confusing to me as I was in corporate and any department has to go and reconcile accounting entries. And every time somebody from accounting reached out and they needed me to verify several entries, it was like they asked me to drink castor oil. I put that off till the end of the week or something like that, and I just kept pushing and kicking the can. But eventually, I obviously have to do it, and eventually you have to do it, and you do it. But now, fast forward, I am a business owner. You can't kick the can.
I can't help with you.
And it's also, but that just gives you the idea. This is my biggest barrier. I know my numbers, but I don't know them in the same manner that an accountant would know their numbers with the cash flow and all that fancy stuff. Let's just call it, the cash flow. But I do know my numbers. I have my own system for it. So maybe what we could do today is we could dive into that for maybe the solopreneurs out there that may be in that same space with me.
Yeah.
Since you deal with small businesses, let's start from the ground up and let's talk about the importance of accounting practices. Is that good?
Absolutely.
Awesome. So in the introduction, I covered a little bit about you, but I think what I want to know is where I want to start now, is a little bit of your backstory of what drew you to finance and how you ultimately ended up in the small business space.
Yeah, absolutely. I am a legacy accountant, and the Armstrongs in my family have been accountants for 3 generations. I'm the 3rd generation. My grandfather, he was president of the local CPA society in Puerto Rico, way before it was called the society. At first, it was called the Institute. And he had his own small practice. Grandpa passed away when I was young. I was in the 3rd grade, so I don't have a lot of insight into what his practice looked like, but from what I gathered, he was dabbling in a little bit of audit, a little bit of tax, and a little bit of outsourced accounting. My father never became a CPA, but he did work with my grandpa in his office. So he learned from him, and he carried on the torch when my grandpa passed away. I remember being a kid and honestly saying I will never be an accountant. Just from looking at my dad and how stressed out he was during busy season and the late hours that he worked and all of that. And I thought erroneously that I did not have an affinity for numbers as a kid.
Okay.
If I had a question in math class, like my mom would try and do her best, but most of the time it was my dad who ended up helping me, and he was not very patient as a teacher. So these like negative associations in my head. And then in college, I changed majors twice and I took a class in accounting for engineers class. I thought I was going to be an industrial engineer.
Mm-hmm.
And this is going to sound so nerdy, but I fell in love with debits and credits. They just made perfect sense in my brain. And I love to write, I love to read. And in that moment, it was just like, oh my God, numbers and accounting, they're just like a perfect language. And this is what I am meant to be doing. So that's how I went into
It's an absolute language. Right?
It is
There's nothing, it's an absolute language. So to your point, let's just have a nerd fest here because I used to be a data analyst and love that piece of my job because the thing is that you get to an absolute point with it. That is definitely when I say that I do my own way of getting my numbers is from data crunching. I know exactly how it works. If I had to look at journal entries, I wouldn't know what I was looking at.
Yeah.
Data is good for me. So numbers, let's go back to a little bit. I do want to go back to a little bit about what you said just to get a little, because a lot of women don't really have an affinity for numbers. That seems to be the going theme. And it could be generational. I don't know. A lot of things may have changed, but it seems that a lot of women just avoid the numbers. I've heard it in the financial space where we don't necessarily have control of our bank accounts. So I was thinking it was going to be similar, but you still had a little bit of not an aversion, but other little barriers that kept you from just jumping straight into accounting.
Yeah, I was projecting from what I thought as a kid that the profession was like and what the experience was like. There was so much more going on behind the scenes in my dad's story with his career and his profession that I wasn't privy to. So I had the perspective of a small kid.
You saw this was related to what he's doing specifically.
Correct.
Yeah.
Also, I remember doing like these complex calculations as a kid and in high school that I have never, ever had to use again as an accountant, right?
Yeah.
The mapping in accounting is pretty straightforward and simple in general terms. And so it was different. I think for me, it's just that realization of that perfect language. Numbers don't lie.
Mm-hmm.
Don't lie. You can try to manipulate them. You can try to force them to play a story, but they don't lie. And then in accounting, you have two-sided entries that always have to balance. So there's just really no hiding the truth,
Those damn two-sided entries, man.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you about that later on, but I do have a question for you. Do you do your own books right now?
Absolutely do my own book. I can't outsource my service bit. Plus,
Okay. So we're on the same page right now in terms, you're building your business, and I'm building my business, and I'm trying, obviously we make certain judgment calls about what we're going to outsource. I do think it's important to have this conversation now because ultimately I just am very well aware of how, as me as a woman with my background and just avoiding numbers. When I had to take accounting in college, it was like, oh my God, why this torture? But the thing is, you have to, once you get in there, when you apply yourself, you realize it's not so bad. But that initial fear is everything. And it exists here and now. It exists in our businesses. It exists within ourselves. And you can't have a successful business without your numbers because they're an absolute language.
Yeah.
We're not in it for anything else. So since you do your own books, let's dive into your own finances and your own journey with your finances. What insights can you share about them? Perhaps maybe what lessons you've learned in doing your own statements?
Yeah. So last year was my first year. I wasn't operating full year. I registered my business July 30th. And for the first 2 months, I was working on the behind the scenes, getting my business registered, my website up and running, figuring out initial offers and pricing and all of that good stuff. So I really started fully into the business at the end of September, beginning of October. And so the expenses that I had and the financials that I have are not for a full year, but they are for a period where I was like fully working on the business. And let me tell you that I spent twice the amount of money that I brought in last year.
Oh, yeah.
That's typical, right? That I feel like that's normal in that first year of business where you are spending more than you're bringing in, especially in the first few months, because there's some investments that you have to put in. So I am a service-based business. So in theory, there shouldn't be a lot of large investments, but I had to invest in technology. I had to buy a computer. My computer was 10 years old and it was no longer driving. I had, invest in like the infrastructure of my office and my internet. Like I needed stronger signal. I needed a Wi-Fi extender so that it would reach my office. I needed a camera and a good microphone and things like that I knew that I was going to be using. And then I also had to make investments in professional and networking organizations because I am building a business. I need to get the word out. I need to get my face out. People need to know me. But it was a reality check when I am doing more than just reconciling the books at year end. I am looking, okay, so where did my money come from? Where did it go? What are the things that I need to do now so that it's not getting out of hand? And now, like, I know, okay, I've made some initial investments. Now I really need to tighten the reins to make sure that this is not getting out of hand. I'm happy to report that for my first month of the year, I was only $200 short.
Awesome.
So we're already making some progress.
That's wonderful. Here's the thing. It's like when we launch our businesses, you're right. There are a lot of rules out there as to how much you should be spending as an initial investment. And at what point do you set the bar so that you can at least start breaking even? For some of us, it takes longer, but the longer that takes, the bigger stress we're putting on ourselves in terms of that. The main thing is that if you're not looking at your numbers, you're not seeing where things are going, and that number can just keep spiraling. Yep. So let me know, when you look back at this, you're not even a year yet, what would you change?
Probably the number of organizations that I joined. However, there's really no way for you to know what's going to work until you try it, right? So I recently put out a newsletter. I just launched my newsletter. And in my first edition, I'm talking about these networking groups that I joined because it is a question that peers in my local community have asked me over and over again. And what I have come to learn is that you only have a finite amount of time that you spend and invest in those groups and those relationships. And so you have to go out there and try a few options where you can really know which ones are the ones that are going to jive with you and that you're going to invest in. But maybe I would have done it a little bit slower. As somebody mentioned, you should join this group, you should be on this list, you should do this other thing. And I'm not going to disparage any of them. But now that I have been doing this for a few months, it's become clearer which ones are the right fit for me and which ones are not. And so it gives me an idea of those that I'm going to be renewing and those that I am going to be pushing to the side.
Yeah, I'm glad you got to that point. For a lot of business owners, it's not necessarily clear, what they're supposed to be getting out of each one of these networking. You just pushed out there and pulled to network. So the fact that you immediately saw that you had to implement a strategy, because that's what most of your money was going from. You saw, and that's the benefit of knowing and being CPAs, that you're looking like, what am I getting out of this?
Yes.
Not just about having a membership with this group. It's what are they providing to me in my growth.
Yeah, I've been lucky. I got to work in public accounting for a good chunk of my career, and I've had incredible mentors. And one of my favorite mentors, and she's actually still in my life, used to say to me all the time, okay, you have these certain number of practice development activities that I had to do in a year as part of my role at that public accounting firm. She would always really drive it into us. You have to be intentional. When you go to a networking event, when you're doing some networking, you're not just there to show up and make friends. What are you trying to get out of that event? What is going to be your goal? And that is my money. Pay these events and these memberships.
Yes.
Those words come back up, and it's like, she's absolutely right. Nobody is watching me and asking me for results. I am. My bank account is. So I have to be really intentional about this.
Okay. Now we're going to get into the solopreneur space, because I'm technically a solopreneur, and in growth mode. Making money excites me.
Same.
And I am positioned, like I can honestly say that my business has taken finally that turn where I'm not just learning, I'm finally implementing and have some confidence.
Yeah.
But making money does excite me. The influx of that money scares me. And I know, like I said, I can obviously crunch my data and everything like that. But you can have money coming out of different funnels or whatever the case, different income funnels. And I think what I'm trying to get at is at what point in my growth, let's just use me as an example, should I recognize that it's time to hire a pro? What needs to happen in my business?
So this will depend, and I'm going to give it to you as is.
Yes.
And as employees, when we are working for a third party, we often get frustrated when they tell us that we can't hire more people in our team to help us. We hate the word lean operations, right? Because it means more work for us with less resources. That is exactly what you should be doing at the start of your solopreneur journey. You really should be focusing on driving revenue before you start adding expenses and outsourcing the work. This is why I, for example, do my own accounting and, God save me, do my own taxes. Because right now, those are not revenue generating expenses. Now, this is not to say that as a solopreneur, you should, if you have absolutely no knowledge of accounting and finance, you should go in and try to make things up as you go. Because this is going to cost you more money in the end. So my advice, and one thing that I have been pondering recently after some experience that I can share with you in a minute, is my goal is that I can get to a point where I can build a course to serve the community of solopreneurs like us that don't have a budget to outsource like these non-revenue generating tasks and don't have the know-how. So they have some educated framework for DIY, like their initial setup, give them like a checklist and a to-do and what not to do list so they can do it on their own for a little bit until they are prepared to outsource. For accounting services, there is a rule of thumb or a guidance that people can think about when planning or looking into budgeting for outsourcing the work. And businesses should plan on spending between 1 to 5% of their gross revenue in accounting services. That will include your bookkeeping and your taxes. For bigger businesses, it could include your audit, depending on the complexity of the business. Now, the smaller you are, the closer you're going to be to that 5%. Mm-hmm. Because there's only so low that people can only go as low as at a certain limit will allow them in their fees to use. So the smaller you are, the higher that percentage is going to be. But it gives you a framework on knowing when you need to invest. Initial investments that you're going to make when you're starting out, what are going to be revenue generating for you? So for me, I chose to invest in marketing. Can't outsource my marketing for somebody else to do it completely because, again, I am not there yet. But I was able to recognize that marketing is not one of my strengths and I needed some guidance. So I hired myself a coach for a quarter that I am working with on designing a strategy, figuring out what are the things that I need to put in place to create or multiple funnels of revenue. And the idea is that investment that I made in this marketing coach is going to directly impact my revenue and my numbers, right? That is somebody might choose to invest in a sales coach. That would also be a smart investment. Again, you most definitely cannot outsource that function fully when you're first starting out, but you can get the guidance on how to get started and help your business see results faster than if you were to do it on your own.
Great. So, what can you share? You already shared some tips in terms of the investment piece and what to outsource for solopreneurs, but are there any other tips that you can share for solopreneurs?
Yes, I recently was on a phone call with a group of solopreneurs like me, and they had questions about separation of business and personal expenses. And I don't think that people understand why this is important. It is important to understand and get a clear picture of how your business is doing. And the only way to do that is to completely separate your personal life from your business life in terms of expenses and revenue. But there is also another key component that people don't automatically realize, and it's what we call the corporate veil. So you go into business, you create your LLC, at least that's what I did. My EIN, the whole idea of the LLC or limited liability company is so that I can protect my personal assets. Well, anybody to come and have a claim against my house, whether it be creditors or, God forbid, I get into a lawsuit situation and
And
somebody.
your personal bank accounts are getting deposed versus the business bank accounts.
Correct. So it's very important to maintain that veil by completely separating your business and your personal expenses. This not just goes beyond which debit or credit card you use. It goes all the way back to what name is the account under. Somebody asked, I went and got a personal bank account that I exclusively use for my business transactions. There's nothing personal going through there. Yes, but if the account is in your name, it means it's yours. It's not the business. And so by doing that, you're already defeating the purpose of the strategy that you put in place by registering your own LLC.
That is interesting. And it's so funny that somebody would. I remember when I started, I didn't have the business credit card in place yet.
Yeah.
And I did just decided to use one personal card
Yeah.
for my expenses. And definitely that I eventually got the business credit card, but I didn't see the value of that at the time. I always had the account, but it becomes something like I could tell you from my rationale, and you could tell me if everybody else in the group also shared that, but it was always the freaking fees that they're less friendly to businesses.
Absolutely. And so don't go to a big bank. I didn't understand when I.
Don't go to Chase.
Exactly. I'll tell you, you can go to Chase. But I worked for 6 years at Puerto Rico's biggest, largest bank. And I'm financial planning and all of that. And in my mind, it's a big bank. They have all of the bells and whistles and the best online platform. And so why would you go smaller? Here's why. Because smaller banks will better cater to small businesses and take care of them. And so if you go to a local credit union, which is what I did, I got a bank account that has absolutely zero fees, has no minimum balance requirement. And so it cost me absolutely nothing to do business with them. So there are ways around that. Just don't go for your bank account to Chase. I did go to Chase for my credit card. And here is why. When you first start, your business has no credit history. I have had a long and successful relationship with Chase on my personal side. And so for me, it made sense to go and ask for a business credit card from them because they would look into my own credit and they knew money I had coming into my bank up until that point. But they also have a business credit card product that charges no fees, no annual fees, and no interest rates for 1 year. So it made sense, right?
Makes sense. No, it's so funny that you say that. That's exactly the route I took you for the same reason. That's great.
STEM, right?
I'm telling you, I think I changed my bank account from different banks. I moved it from Chase because we just didn't have something that was friendly to businesses. And to me, at the time, $25 a month was a lot of money at the time, but I bounced it around and I did. You're absolutely right. I'm going to tell you because I did find a small bank that had free business checking in town and I can walk up the street and do whatever I got to do. You just have to pick wisely.
Yeah.
And I love your tip on use your existing bank to get your business credit card, because that's exactly the route I went. And it was through Chase.
Yep.
Because I do like him. I do very much like what they have from the personal standpoint. And I have a lot of accounts with them. And it made sense. And guess what? I got my card.
And what I didn't tell my group, because I hadn't realized it at the time, I just did a couple of weeks ago, got 100,000 point back. So it's like about $15,000 that I have there sitting in my account with Chase that I can use towards another business expense.
Exactly. I know you travel, so
Yeah.
I'm sure that's in there for some trip somewhere or something, or maybe a business trip that's coming down the pike for you. That's awesome. Thank you so much. Those are great tips. And I want to segue into more on the personal side for you, because I do have a burning question for you, because at the end of every interview, what I want to know, I love books. So I love to know what each of my guests have read that changed their life. So my question to you is, what is your favorite book of all time? And please let us know why.
Okay. I don't know if these are my favorite books, but these are my most memorable ones. And I have two. One of them is The Hobbit. And that is because this is the book that actually gave me insight into what my favorite genre is, which is fantasy fiction. That has evolved into urban fantasy now, but just this whole creation of world that are completely opposite of the reality that we live in and that give you the chance to use your imagination is just fascinating to me. And the other book was Queen of the Damned from Anne Rice. And it's because there's this scene, this is vampire books. And if you're familiar with the characters, the Queen of the Damned, she was one of the first vampires, and she grabs Lestat, which is the hero in the show or in the books, and she lifts him up, and they are flying across the world. And he is talking about how he is feeling the cold air against his cheeks. And in that writing, I could feel the air, the cold air against my cheek. And I will never forget that scene and that moment where it was like, wow, if only I could be a writer that could make a reader feel like that.
I like that. It's amazing how some writers just have that talent, because that's the reason I read books as well, is in complete awe of how they can put you in a certain place and time and have you feel it, smell it. And Anne Rice was definitely a favorite of mine. I couldn't share one detail about her book because it was a long time ago. It was quite a while ago.
Yeah.
But she's definitely at the top of my list in terms of fantastic writers.
Yeah. I read these books like over 25 years ago.
Yeah. And they still, wow.
And I still remember that scene. I don't remember all of the details of the books, but I remember that particular scene because of how she made me feel. And I feel like it's easier for somebody to make you feel sad or joy or laugh with their writing, but that physical sensation, mind-blowing.
I had a similar experience with Margaret George, the autobiography of King Henry VIII.
Okay.
That she could put you, but obviously I don't live in that time. But the fact that you literally, it felt like I was in his room in the castle and everything like that. So I definitely get what you mean by it. It is extraordinary.
It is such a gift.
So before we close it out, I want to give you the floor, because I want you to share with us anything that you have in the works for your business in the coming future.
I am very excited. This week, I'm guessing by the time this episode comes out, you'll know, but I have joined the Entreprenista Expert Council, and that is going to be announced later this week. I'm very excited about that. It is going to be, I'm going to have the opportunity to write 12 articles this year for Entreprenista, and they're going to be featuring me on their website and sharing that. And the hope is going to help continue cementing me as a subject matter expert and a leader in the industry. I am also working, shout out to Sarah Noel Block from the Tiny Marketing Club. I am working with her on my marketing strategy and coming up with micro offers and gateway offers that will give my audience the chance to get their feet a little wet into what it looks like to work with me when I talk about improving the efficiency of your accounting operations. So it's very exciting because it's not the traditional way that accountants do business. I'm doing something different, and I'm just excited to see what results this is going to yield.
Wonderful. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
So we're going to close it out for right now. We want to make sure that these episodes are nice and short and something that our listeners can take in on the drive to the grocery store. And Melissa, I thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much. You're such a delightful host. You're definitely meant to be doing this. I appreciate you having me as your guest.
Thank you. Thank you for tuning into Diana Prince Lives Next Door. If you want to learn more about Melissa Armstrong and Steadyhand Accounting, be sure to click her link in the description. We'll have it there. And just remember that this podcast is a tribute to the GAL Project and Angela Atelier's shared mission to empower women. Together, let's continue building a community where we inspire, support, and celebrate each other. So until next time, keep owning your story and keep showing up. This is Angela Acosta signing off.